Imagine walking through the ancient grasslands of South America, and suddenly you encounter what looks like a living tank. Not a modern military vehicle, but a creature so heavily armored that even the most fearsome predators would think twice before attacking. This is Glyptodon, and its story is far stranger than you might imagine. The Glyptodon wasn't just big, it was monumentally massive. Picture a Volkswagen Beetle. Now imagine that car is actually a living, breathing armadillo. That's the scale we're talking about. These prehistoric giants could reach up to 11 feet in length and weigh as much as 4,400 pounds. But here's what most people don't know. Their armor wasn't just for show. Each Glyptodon carried on its back a dome-shaped carapace made of over 1,000 individual bony plates called osteoderms. These weren't loosely connected like modern armadillos. They were fused together into a single, immovable shell. The fascinating part? Each plate had a unique rosette pattern, like a fingerprint, meaning no two Glyptodons were exactly alike. But the armor gets even bizarrer. Recent studies have revealed that the shell wasn't just bone, it was a complex composite material. The outer layer was incredibly hard, while the inner layers were more flexible, creating a structure that could absorb impacts like modern body armor. Nature had invented Kevlar millions of years before humans even existed. Now here's where things get truly weird. The Glyptodon's tail was a weapon straight out of a medieval fantasy. Some species had tails ending in a massive spiked club that could weigh up to 100 pounds. Imagine swinging a bowling ball covered in spikes at the end of a muscular, flexible rod. Scientists have found Glyptodon shells with holes that perfectly match these tail clubs, suggesting these creatures engaged in brutal, armor-piercing combat with each other. But why would they fight? The answer lies in their social behavior, which was far more complex than anyone expected. Evidence suggests Glyptodons were territorial creatures that lived in small family groups. Males would battle for dominance, and these weren't gentle shoving matches. They were full-contact, potentially lethal encounters. The winner got breeding rights. The loser might end up with a cracked shell and a very bad day. Here's something that will blow your mind. Glyptodons were selective eaters with surprisingly sophisticated tastes. Analysis of their teeth and fossilized dung revealed they preferred specific types of grasses and plants, avoiding others that were toxic or hard to digest. They had a 4-chambered stomach similar to modern cows, which allowed them to ferment tough plant material. Essentially, these armored tanks were walking, heavily defended fermentation vats. The digestive system of a Glyptodon was a marvel of biological engineering. Their gut bacteria produced massive amounts of methane, so much that some scientists believe herds of Glyptodons might have contributed to ancient climate patterns. Imagine that, creatures so gassy they could influence the weather. It's not as far-fetched as it sounds. Modern cattle produce significant greenhouse gases, and Glyptodons were much larger. But here's the really creepy part. Glyptodons couldn't roll into a ball like their modern armadillo cousins. Their shell was completely rigid, fused to their spine and ribs. Once you were inside a Glyptodon shell, you were committed. This meant they had to face threats head-on, relying entirely on their armor and that devastating tail weapon. There was no retreat, no hiding, only stand and fight. The shell itself was a masterpiece of natural engineering that scientists are still studying today. The dome shape wasn't just for protection, it was aerodynamically designed to deflect attacks and distribute force across the entire structure. When a predator bit down, the curved surface would redirect the pressure, making it nearly impossible to crack. It's the same principle used in modern helmet design. Recent discoveries have revealed something even astonishing. Glyptodons had a unique skeletal structure that allowed them to support their massive weight. Their vertebrae were partially fused to the shell, creating a rigid framework that distributed the load. But here's the kicker. They also had extra vertebrae in their lower back, giving them surprising flexibility in their hindquarters. This meant they could pivot and swing that tail weapon with devastating accuracy. The feet of a Glyptodon were equally bizarre. They had massive, elephant-like feet with thick pads. But here's what's strange. Their front feet had huge claws, much larger than necessary for walking. Scientists now believe these claws were used for digging, not burrows, but for excavating roots and tubers. Imagine a 2-ton armored creature delicately digging up its dinner like a prehistoric gardener. Their skull was another evolutionary oddity. Glyptodons had incredibly thick skull bones, some areas measuring over 2 inches thick. This wasn't just for protection, it was structural support for their massive jaw muscles. They needed incredible bite force to grind through tough, fibrous plants. But here's the weird part. Their brain cavity was surprisingly small for their body size. These weren't the geniuses of the Ice Age. They were living fortresses that didn't need to be smart. They just needed to be indestructible. The eyes of a Glyptodon were positioned on the sides of their head, giving them nearly 360 degrees vision. They could see predators coming from almost any direction. But their eyesight wasn't their primary sense. That honor went to their sense of smell. Their nasal cavity was enormous, suggesting they could detect food, mates, and threats from great distances. In the tall grasslands where they lived, smell was more valuable than sight. Here's something that sounds like science fiction. The shell of a Glyptodon continued to grow throughout its entire life. The osteoderms would add layers, like tree rings, meaning you could potentially age a Glyptodon by examining its armor. Older individuals had thicker, more heavily ornamented shells. They were literally wearing their life story on their backs.
The relationship between Glyptodons and early humans is one of the most fascinating and controversial topics in paleontology. Evidence suggests that humans didn't just hunt these creatures. They used them in ways that seem almost impossible. Archaeological sites have revealed Glyptodon shells that were converted into shelters, with fire pits inside and tools scattered around. Early humans were literally living inside the armored remains of these giants. But here's where it gets darker. Cut marks on Glyptodon bones suggest humans were butchering these creatures for food. Imagine the effort required to crack open that armor and access the meat inside. It would have been like trying to open a safe with stone tools. Yet humans figured it out, possibly by flipping them over and attacking the softer underbelly, or by using fire to weaken the shell's structure. Some researchers have proposed an even more incredible theory, that humans might have hunted Glyptodons by driving them into bogs or soft ground where their massive weight would cause them to sink. Once trapped, the creature would be helpless, unable to escape or defend itself effectively. It's a hunting strategy that requires intelligence, planning, and cooperation, exactly what early humans excelled at. The extinction of Glyptodons around 10,000 years ago coincides suspiciously with human arrival in South America. While climate change played a role, the timing suggests humans with a final nail in the coffin. These creatures had survived for millions of years through multiple ice ages and climate shifts, but they couldn't survive us. It's a sobering reminder of humanity's impact on megafauna. Here's something that will change how you think about these creatures. Glyptodons were likely semi-aquatic. Fossil evidence shows they lived near rivers and lakes, and their body structure suggests they were capable swimmers. That massive dome-shaped shell, it would have provided buoyancy like a living submarine. They could have grazed on aquatic plants and used water as an escape route from predators. The social structure of Glyptodon herds was probably more complex than we imagine. Like modern elephants, they may have been led by matriarchs, with females and young traveling together, while males lived solitary lives except during mating season. The evidence? Fossil sites often contain multiple individuals of different ages, suggesting family groups died together, possibly in floods or other catastrophic events. Mating rituals would have been spectacular and terrifying. Males with their spiked tail clubs would have engaged in ritualized combat, smashing their weapons against each other's armor in displays of strength. The sound would have echoed across the plains, a thunderous clanging that could be heard for miles. The female would watch, choosing the victor as her mate. It was nature's version of a medieval tournament. Here's something that sounds made up, but isn't. Glyptodon babies were born with soft, flexible shells that hardened over time. For the first few months of life, they were vulnerable, relying entirely on their mother's protection. The mother would position herself over the young, using her armored body as a living shield. It's one of the few times these creatures showed anything resembling tenderness. The growth rate of Glyptodons was surprisingly slow. It could take 15 to 20 years for an individual to reach full size, and they might have lived for 40 years or more. This slow reproduction rate made them particularly vulnerable to hunting pressure. Unlike rabbits or deer that could quickly replenish their numbers, Glyptodons couldn't bounce back from population losses. Recent genetic studies have revealed that Glyptodons were more closely related to modern armadillos than previously thought, but with a twist. They diverged from the armadillo family tree over 35 million years ago. They represent an entirely separate evolutionary experiment in armor and defense. Modern armadillos are like the compact cars of the armored mammal world. Glyptodons were the tanks. The internal anatomy of a Glyptodon was as bizarre as its exterior. Their lungs were massive, occupying a huge portion of their body cavity, which makes sense given their size and the energy required to move that armored bulk. But here's the strange part. Their heart was relatively small. This suggests they were slow-moving creatures with low metabolic rates, conserving energy like living fortresses that didn't need to rush anywhere. Temperature regulation was a major challenge for Glyptodons. That thick shell was great for protection, but terrible for cooling down. Scientists believe they were most active during cooler parts of the day, dawn and dusk, and would rest in shade or water during the heat. Some researchers suggest they might have wallowed in mud like modern rhinos, using the cooling effect of evaporation to regulate their body temperature. The teeth of Glyptodons never stopped growing, constantly replacing material worn away by their abrasive diet. This is called hypsodonty, and it's common in grazing animals. But Glyptodon teeth had a unique structure. They lacked enamel, instead being made entirely of dentin and cementum. This made them softer, but also more resistant to cracking, a trade-off that worked perfectly for their lifestyle. Here's something that connects ancient and modern.
The shells of Glyptodons have been found with healed injuries, proving these creatures could survive serious trauma. Broken bones, cracked shells, even puncture wounds from predator attacks all show signs of healing. This tells us they had robust immune systems and remarkable regenerative abilities. They were survivors in every sense of the word. The predators that hunted Glyptodons were equally impressive. Saber-toothed cats, giant short-faced bears, and terror birds all shared the landscape with these armored giants. The hunting strategy would have required patience and precision, waiting for a young, old, or injured individual, and then attacking the vulnerable areas. It was a dangerous game where one mistake could mean a broken jaw or crushed skull from that tail club. Some of the most incredible Glyptodon fossils come from tar pits, where these creatures became trapped and preserved in exquisite detail. The La Brea tar pits in California and similar sites in South America have yielded specimens so well preserved that we can see details of their skin texture, the arrangement of their armor plates, even the contents of their last meals. It's like having a time machine to the Ice Age. The legacy of Glyptodons extends beyond paleontology. Engineers study their shell structure for insights into armor design. Architects examine the dome shape for building inspiration. Materials scientists analyze the composite nature of their osteoderms for new protective materials. A creature that went extinct 10,000 years ago is still teaching us lessons today. Here's the final, most poignant detail. The last Glyptodons probably had no idea they were the last. They continued their routines, grazing, fighting, mating, unaware that their entire species was on the brink of extinction. It's a reminder that even the most well-defended, successful creatures can vanish when conditions change too rapidly. The story of Glyptodon is ultimately a story about adaptation and its limits. These creatures evolved the perfect defense for their world, armor so complete, so effective that they dominated their ecosystem for millions of years. But when the world changed, when new predators arrived with intelligence and tools, that armor wasn't enough. Sometimes being indestructible isn't the same as being invincible. Today, when you see a modern armadillo, remember you're looking at the distant cousin of these magnificent giants. The same basic body plan, the same armored approach to life, just scaled down to fit a world that no longer has room for Volkswagen tanks. The Glyptodon is gone, but its legacy lives on in every armored creature that walks the earth, a reminder that nature's experiments in defense can be both spectacular and ultimately temporary.